Welcome to Powercoat Music. In this video, we're going to talk about the Alesis 3630 compressor and why I use it. Compressors are essential and powerful audio effects. However, they're often mysterious, misunderstood, and misused. So let's review what a compressor does before we talk about why I use the one I do. Now, if you're not familiar with compressors or you want to learn more about them, then this is the video for you. So grab your coffee or your tea, kick back and relax. We have a lot to cover. A compressor actually works to reduce the dynamic range of a recording by lowering the audio levels of the loudest sections. This means that the loudest and the quietest sections of a recording are moved closer together. Now, this is closer together in volume, making the differences in volume less noticeable. After the audio signal is compressed, a compressor can then boost it. The impact is that the quietest sections become boosted, which brings them closer to the loudest sections. As a result, it's easier to control the dynamic range of an audio recording. Now, this lets you better manage how individual tracks sit inside your final mixdowns. I purchased my Alesis 3630 back in the late 90s, and I've used it ever since because of the following reasons. For what I needed to do, it's consistently gotten the job done, and it's done it well. It's been a workhorse. It's been reliable for decades. I haven't had any issues with it whatsoever. It's economical, but it doesn't look or feel cheap. It's got all of the basic features that you would expect or that a compressor would need to have, and more. It's flexible, easy to use, and helps significantly with my final mastering. Now, in my studio, the 3630 sits at the end of my external mastering effects signal chain. Now, I use an equalizer and a sonic maximizer to compensate for any deficiencies prior to and after compression. So for me, that really helps the Alesis 3630 to shine. Now let's look at some of the common ways that audio compressors are used. Now, they're used for decreasing an audio signal's dynamic range to accommodate a specific recording with more of a limited dynamic range. Kind of talked about that previously. It's used to increase a guitar's sustain. It's used to smooth out bass sounds for a more consistent level. It's used to prevent peaks in common audio signals like drums and from overloading a signal when you're recording naturally. They were used to even out vocal dynamics to compensate for poor micro vocal technique. In live applications, the limiting can increase a vocalist's level before feedback occurs. They're also used to reduce sharp peaks associated with some signal processors and synthesizer patches. And you know what I'm talking about when you're playing. The noise gate can be used to key in on instrument's rhythm or key in one instrument's rhythm to another instrument. It's an interesting effect. You can use the sidechain to remove excessive hissing from vocals during narration. This is commonly known as de-essing. You can also use the sidechain to lower background music or other program material in narration. This is commonly known as ducking. Now, past and present users have complained that the 3630 doesn't do everything that Alesis says it can do. And at this price point, or at the price point of 3630, that may not be reasonable. So, however, For what I use the Alesis 3630 for has gotten the job done again simply and effectively every time for me and for many others. Now let's take a look at the 3630's front panel controls. Audio effects compressors share many basic controls and functionality, and that's what we're going to cover right now. The front panel controls for the two compressor limiter channels are identical in a 3630. The channel A controls are located between the power switch and the stereo link switch in the middle of the panel. The channel B controls are located to the right of the stereo link switch. The stereo link switch controls whether the two channels will operate as stereo, well, that is as a stereo limiter or two mono limiters. Since both channels operate the same way, I will only cover the left channel controls. So let's take a look first at the threshold control. Now, the threshold control sets the level above which the signal will be compressed or limited. Rotating the control clockwise raises the threshold and clamps the signals at a higher level. Now, this reduces the amount of compression or limiting. The ratio control sets the compression slope. Now, this determines how the output signal will change in relation to the input signal once that input signal exceeds the threshold. The first digit indicates how many decibels of change will cause a 1 decibel output change. The higher the ratio, the greater the compression and the more squeezed the sound will be. The attack control works only with the peak RMS switch in peak mode. RMS mode automatically adjusts the attack time depending upon the characteristics of the signal being processed. In peak mode, this control sets how fast the limiter's internal circuitry reacts to change in input level. The longer the attack time, the more the signal's dynamics are allowed through before the action limiting kicks in. With slower attack times, the limiter responds more to the average signal level. This produces a smoother sound that tends to retain dynamic character. But the trade-offs are is that the 3630 can't react as quickly to sudden shifts. The release control works only with the peak RMS switch in peak mode. Again, the RMS mode automatically adjusts the release time, depending upon the characteristics of the signal being processed. In peak mode, this control determines how long it takes for the limiter to return to the unity gain after going into limiting. With short release times, the limiter tracks every change in the level, producing a potentially uneven or rippling effect that decreases dynamics and increases the average output level. Longer release times tend to squash the signal more, producing less overall output, but retaining more of the signal's dynamics. Excessive release times can be used as an effect. Now let's look at the output control. The process of reducing dynamics lowers the signal's overall level. So this control is used to compensate by adding output gain. Now let's look at the front panel switches. Each switch has an in-out position on the panel. The legend above each switch shows the status associated with each switch position. Let's look at the peak RMS switch. With peak response, the 3630 responds to signal peaks to ensure that they do not exceed a particular threshold. This mode is ideal when using the 3630 to avoid clipping. In the RMS mode, the 3630 responds to a signal's average level. This preserves more of a relationship between the signal's peaks and valleys, and is useful when you want to compress or limit but still retain a fair amount of dynamic feel. Let's look at the hard knee, soft knee switch. With the hard knee response, signals are clamped to the limiting threshold as soon as they exceed it. With the soft knee response, signals are clamped more gently, giving a more natural sound. The input-output switches, they select whether the input or output meter displays the input or output signals. Now the bypass comp switch, in the bypass position, the gain reduction LEDs will turn off. Okay? The limiter circuitry is switched out of the signal path, so you can hear the unprocessed sound. Now, in the comp position, the 3630 processes the input signal. Now, here's a note. The 3630 must be powered up to pass a signal with either switch setting. This is important. So let's move on to the stereo link switch. In stereo operation, both channels need to operate in relation to each other to avoid shifting in the stereo image when one channel goes into limiting. With the link switch out, channels A and B operate independently as two monophonic compressor limiters. With the link switch in, channel A's controls become the master, and these are the master controls for both channels A and B, with the exception of the input-output and the +4 dBu and -10 dBV switches, which will operate independently. The stereo signal is processed identically by both channels to ensure proper stereo imaging. While in stereo mode, the compressor and gate control signals are derived from a combination of channels A and B inputs. So let's move on to the noise gate controls. The noise gate will not pass signals below the specified threshold setting, but signals above the threshold will pass unaffected. In a typical application, the threshold will be set just above any hiss or noise. With no signal going through the 3630, no hiss would be audible. Simple. A signal going through the 3630 would pass through unimpeded. Any hiss would also be present under those conditions, but with a strong signal present, it wouldn't tend to mask the hiss, or I would say it would tend to mask the hiss. So to use the 3630 as a noise gate, set the ratio control to 1:1. This passes the input signal to the noise gate without processing. Let's look at the threshold control. Now this sets the level above that which the noise gate will allow signals to pass. Turning the threshold fully counterclockwise disables the noise gate, and this lets signals through unaltered. To set the proper noise gate level for most applications, first turn the noise gate threshold all the way off. Turn all instruments to be gated, turn them on, but do not pass any program material through them. No audio, right? So slowly increase the threshold clockwise until the red LED comes on. Any background noise should now be eliminated. Let's move on to the rate control. When a signal drops below the threshold, rate determines how long it takes for the gate to fade smoothly from open to close. Shorter settings provide a maximum hiss reduction, but then they create a choppier sound. Longer settings in gain create a smoother response. But this is at the expense of letting some of the hiss come through after the input signal drops below the threshold. So let's move on to front panel metering. The 3630's 3 meters for each channel indicates several important parameters. Well, first is the gain reduction meter. Now, this compares the processed and unprocessed sounds. Now, it shows also the amount of gain reduction being applied to the input signal. The input-output meter, this monitors the input or output signal as selected by the input-output switch. This is useful when matching input and output levels or to compare the signal level prior to limiting, with the one after limiting. The noise gate meter, whether it's open or closed, when the noise gate is closed, the red LED is on. When it's open and letting through the input, the green LED is lit. Let's move on to the sidechain functionality. The sidechain jack allows for two useful functions. The first is keying. Now, keying one signal with another so that dynamics of one signal depends on the dynamics of a second signal is a function that is very useful and interesting. The frequency dependent limiting, this is number 2 with sidechain functionality. This is done so that limiting is triggered only by certain frequencies. The sidechain jack on the 3630 is a stereo jack, where the ring connection sends the 3630's control signal for processing and the tip connection receives the processed sound. For keying applications, a regular mono audio cord can be used since it's not necessary to send the 3630's control signal out for processing. Now for frequency dependent limiting applications that involve plugging into another signal processor, a special stereo dual mono cord is required. And that's going to be shown on the screen right now. This is going to be what you need. So let's look at the keying feature, which is better known as ducking. A typical use for keying is to lower the background music in the presence of narration. This is called ducking because the music ducks to get out of the way of the narration. A similar application would be to lower the level of a rhythm guitar while a vocalist is singing. Another key feature is called de-essing. Some vocalists and announcers, especially if they're equalized for more treble, will produce an excessive S sounds. Now this is concentrated mostly in the upper mid-range or treble naturally. The limiter would ideally limit the signal only when the high frequency S sounds occur. This is possible by inserting an equalizer into the sidechain jack. This application requires the special stereo to dual mono cord that we talked about previously, along with an equalizer. Now, in summary, audio compressors require extra attention and a lot of experimentation to get the best results. Any changes you make in your audio signal chain can significantly, impact a compressed signal, especially when you are mastering. I strongly suggest testing a compressor that you are considering purchasing in your home studio first, if at all possible. Compressors can act like musical instruments. A lot of people use them that way. And they have a personalized effect on how your music sounds. I generally do not trust other people's compressor demos because of this, but that's just me. Well, that about wraps it up. If you like this video, please give it the thumbs up. Click the subscribe button on your screen now and join our group. We have new videos coming out every 7 to 10 days, and we'd love to have you be a part of our group. Leave a comment in the comment section below and let us know what you think about this video. Also, while you're here at the channel, take a look at some of the other videos, listen to the music, and let us know what you think. We want to thank you so much for stopping by. We really appreciate it, and we look forward to seeing you soon.